It's James Franklin versus Dan Lanning, round 2. And when you talk pressure in this Oregon-Penn State showdown, it's almost entirely on Penn State's head coach.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for a crossover edition of Locked On Ducks and Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm Spencer McLaughlin. He is Zach Seyko. Our followers probably know who we are pretty well at this point. Thank you all so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks if you're on my channel, the Nittany Lions if you're on Zach's channel. A lot of coach speak, but the fun kind coming on today's show. We'll talk about the coordinator matchups in this game, which are fascinating because they have all seen each other before. How does that play out on today's show, which is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the FanDuel app today. I don't know how you could come to the conclusion that there's more pressure on Dan Lanning to win this game. The narrative surrounding Penn State, the opportunity for Penn State with what they have coming back, the Jim Knowles hire from last year. You add on top of that the fact that Dan Lanning beat Ohio State last year, because he didn't have the same question or stigma. Every now and then, I'd see the comment get thrown out there from some folks, Lanning hasn't won the big, can he win the big game? Well, then he beat Ohio State, then he beat Penn State in the Big Ten championship game. That narrative went away very quickly. James Franklin can dump that narrative of he's never going to do more than just go 10-2 and lose to the big teams and lose the big games. That's what he's going to do. If he's an underdog, he's losing. And if he's a favorite, he's winning. He is a slight favorite in this game. But Seyko, I think there is a lot more pressure on James Franklin in this game than there is for Dan Lanning. Not that Lanning couldn't take criticism if he loses, but it's way more in Franklin's corner.
Yeah, Penn State has more to lose in this game against Oregon. Because of all the things that you mentioned, and then some, right? Dan Lanning he's not pushing 15 years with one program. He's still a relatively new head coach. James Franklin he's at Vanderbilt. He's been at Penn State for a decade plus, again, pushing 15 years. And there isn't a game that you can point to and say, that's his signature victory, other than Ohio State 2016. There's some other good games across the board, right? There's bowl wins, okay? They've won 11 games in a season. They made it to the semifinal. But when we talk about signature victories, or you say Dan Lanning, Ohio State last season, even though they got absolutely blitzed in the Rose Bowl Part 2. Okay. But they still...
Thanks for reminding us of that. We appreciate it.
Might as well help out because you're reminding me that James Franklin is what? 1-20 against top 10 teams, etc. The record's bad. And so Penn State has more to lose, but they also have so much more to gain. Because I think of this from an even larger picture for the storylines. It's not just about, proving that you are now in Tier A as opposed to Tier B. I think of the recruiting aspect of it because Oregon recruits nationally. They've gone into this D.C., Maryland, Virginia area where Penn State has routinely done well. And now Oregon's starting to take recruits from an area that's been so good to Penn State. I just think of all those other things. If Oregon comes into town and defeats Penn State, it puts more pressure on the Ohio State game, potentially Indiana down the road as well with what we saw against Illinois. It just sets Penn State so many steps backwards, whereas with Oregon, it's like, okay, you are the underdog. You are kind of expected to lose here in some sort of sense, at least according to the books. And then Penn State was also projected to be that true national title contender. Not that Oregon wasn't, but Penn State was the number 2 team right out of the gate this season. National title aspirations. This is the year that James Franklin is supposed to do it. That same ideal wasn't given to Oregon this time around.
Yeah, and for Oregon in this game, it's not that there isn't plenty on the line. I discussed this yesterday on my show that, the path to the playoff, I think looks more difficult with a loss here now than it did before the season because of how good Indiana has looked. That's Oregon's next opponent, by the way. They've got a bye week, but then Indiana looked really good. And I thought Washington would be good. We'll see what they do against Ohio State this weekend. I thought USC would be good. They look a little better even than I thought so far. We'll see if they beat Illinois this weekend. But, the path for Oregon and Penn State both is you go 10-2 in the Big Ten, you're going to get in. Especially if you're a preseason top 10 team, like it or not, that ingrained sense of bias from the AP voters in the committee, it matters. And so Oregon has that working in their advantage. So does Penn State. I think 10-2 gets either of these teams in. But, you lose this game and suddenly you're on significantly thinner ice than you were going into it. Whereas if you win, you don't just have a really high quality win, but you have, more margin for error going forward. And so, it's not that there isn't pressure on Oregon to win the game at some level. It's just that on paper, they shouldn't be expected to win the game. I know plenty of Oregon fans are very confident in that regard, but, to your point, there's way more for Penn State to lose than Oregon because Oregon has a ton to gain in this matchup, especially for me personally and how I look at this team, which has always been, this should be a playoff team. There's way too much talent there. But if you win this game, you are right back up to starting to let those thoughts creep in of, is this the year? Is this the season that it'll finally break through? Because if Oregon can win this game in this spot with Penn State at home off a bye, who can't they beat in all of college football? Not that there aren't other good teams out there. Georgia looks really good. We know Ohio State is good. There are a lot of good teams, but if Oregon can win this game, I think you show that you've gotten back to that level that you were at last season where it was going into the playoff, national championship or bust. The expectations in my eyes shift dramatically for Oregon in this game if they go on the road and get a win.
Well, and again, it goes back to kind of the preseason chatter around both these teams. Penn State was viewed as a true national title contender. So was Clemson, right?
Yeah.
But that conversation's a lot different now. And I'm not trying to imply that Penn State is pending Clemson. But I'm saying that you had your tier 1 teams going into the season. Oregon was a tier 2 team, and it just kind of echoes the point on both of our sides. Leverage. You have leverage. This is a consequential game one way or another. You now don't have to worry, maybe isn't the right word, but you just have a little bit of wiggle room. You have a little less pressure on your plate going forward throughout the season because 9-3, you're all but definitely out. And it's again, if you're a national title team, you shouldn't be relying on mulligans, but if Penn State gets the injury bug, Oregon gets the injury bug, right? And you get into a situation where, a game's now tougher than you perceived it to be early on. You just don't know. But a game like this, it gives you your signature win for either coach, Franklin or Lanning. It gives you leverage for the rest of the season. And I think of the recruiting aspect as well, with how many elite recruits that are being nationally recruited get to see this one up close and personal. That's going to have an impact. And recruiting's all about the future. So this game has an impact 2 to 3 years down the road, which could, really help a team or set them back a couple steps and make their job harder.
Speaking of recruiting in that general area, thanks for Brandon Finney. We like that guy. Whew.
Instant starter. That's why Penn State was right there until Oregon swooped right in.
Yep, Michigan was in the fold as well. That's one of the battles. And, at some level, it does feel strange to talk about the recruiting impact, but I think you're right to bring it up because...
Finney, Iheanacho, I think of those.
Yeah, Iheanacho, I think, is how it's pronounced. At least that's what I've come to understand. But, Finney is the guy that came to my mind immediately when you brought that up because he is literally one of Oregon's starting corners. I think he's Oregon's best corner at this point in time, which is saying something because the secondary has played really well. The pass defense for Oregon has been really, really good. We're not going into player matchups today. We're going into coaching matchups today. Lanning against James Franklin. But more interestingly, can Tosh Lupoi have a better day against Andy Kotelnicki? We'll talk about that and more on this crossover edition of Locked On Ducks and Locked On Nittany Lions. First, this episode brought to you by our friends at Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride, with more IIHS top safety pick awards than anyone else as of August 2025. From footwork to breath work, the athletes in this game sweat all the details. Mazda brings this same intention to how they craft every model. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. Why wouldn't you want to level up? Both these teams want to level up their play this week. You can level up your everyday drives when you get a Mazda car. Plus, they've got all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV. You can drive with confidence through almost any season. Like the players for Oregon and Penn State, Mazda sweats every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. This episode also brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money, an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. And take it from Seyko and myself, we are busy guys. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you to make it simpler. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money, all without ever touching a spreadsheet. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONCollege. Check them out at monarchmoney.com. Let's talk coordinators. And I want to start with, I guess, what I'll deem the more controversial of Oregon's two coordinators, the one that there are fewer questions about. You know, we talked about what's at stake for the head coaches in this game, but this is a real opportunity for Oregon defensive coordinator Tosh Lupoi to silence his critics, of which there are several. And I understand it at some level. But Oregon has been looking in this game, and this was a storyline with the Ducks I talked about coming into the season. They have failed to hold teams under 30 points in the biggest games of the year. And especially with how Penn State's offenses looked through the first three games, if that doesn't happen here, the calls for Oregon to change defensive coordinators, I bet will get even louder, especially if Oregon doesn't win the game. But he's going up against Andy Kotelnicki, who's one of the best offensive coordinators in the country. Full disclosure, his playbook is my favorite one to use in EA College Football 26. A lot of just wildly awesome concepts and plays in there. But I think the number one thing that I watch in that matchup of Penn State's OC against Oregon's DC, Kotelnicki against Lupoi, I look for how Oregon is able to better adapt to motion and tempo, because that's what Kotelnicki exposed in that Big Ten championship game. Ohio State used the same things. Oregon hadn't made those adjustments. We know how that went. But what Penn State did well, but they ran the ball, of course, exceptionally well, 297 yards on the ground. But just fundamentally, they used a lot of motion. They used a lot of shifts, which is a hallmark of the Kotelnicki offense. And they used some tempo as well. Oregon wasn't ready for it. That's the number one thing that Tosh Lupoi has to have ready. It has to be ready for defensively, or else Oregon's defense will be on its heels again.
Yeah, it's the change of pace more than it is the tempo itself, because all of a sudden Penn State will go from first to fifth gear, and that's what they were trying to do, and it just looked out of rhythm at times in these first few games. It looked clunky, so it's something that Penn State's definitely been working on, especially over the course of these 2 weeks to prepare for Oregon. So you get the extra week to prepare for what Dan Lanning, the whole system's going to throw at you between Stein, between Lupoi. But you also get to work on your craft. You get to perfect some extra things. So, tempo is going to be one of those things. It's where Penn State speeds up, but then they slow down. Then they speed up again. It's not just, we're going no huddle. We're going as quick as we can. It's a flip of the switch where after a couple plays, Penn State decides, we're going to keep your defensive players out there. I know you can there's different substitution rules and everything, and the refs allow you to wait and stuff, but it's still kind of that surprise. You got to make your adjustments quickly as possible. It's how you use the tempo, not the fact that you are using tempo, or else every team in college football that runs at a lightning fast pace would be really good, right? They'd be the best teams in college football. So it is how you use that tempo, and it's shown in the past, whether it's the Big Ten championship game, whether it's the Rose Bowl game, that it does work against Lupoi. I would imagine that he at least is more of aware of it right now and that it's not going to totally catch him off guard, but Penn State will be able to create some mismatches by doing that.
Yeah, the issue I did think was with tempo at times in maybe the Rose Bowl a bit more than the Big Ten championship game, but Oregon just in the Big Ten title game so many times looked like they were not fully ready at the snap, or they were trying to communicate with emotion, and they just weren't. They just weren't always as ready to go as they needed to be. I didn't feel like it was, some major tackling issue. Like Katron Allen and Nick Singleton broke, 3 tackles every single play. No, they just had a bunch of room to run, and if you give those guys a bunch of room, then they're going to beat you. They're going to beat you because they're really, really good backs. And we mentioned our crossover on Monday that Penn State's offensive identity has been kind of lacking so far. I think this is a chance because of how the Big Ten title game went. I think this is an opportunity for Kotelnicki to say, hey, maybe we should just lean on these 2 NFL running backs a little bit more. Wild concept. I know. Who could have foreseen? But he might watch that game tape back and go, boy, we were doing this run concept and they had no answer for it. And Oregon's personnel last year was probably a little better than what Oregon has personnel-wise on defense this year, though I still like this defensive group a lot.
And that's just it. It's that Kotelnicki, you say offensive identity, or Penn State maybe is unsure of what it is. The offensive identity is to run the rock, be a physical team. They will go 7 offensive linemen in this game. You will see 6, 7 offensive lineman formations. Is Oregon ready for that? Do they have additional players that can compete? Okay, so that's kind of the chess match within the chess match. A little bit of 4D chess here is when Penn State is going to go true power. Oh, it's worked against them, so they finally said, hey, let's do it ourselves. Michigan, Ohio State, they've done it against us to close out games and to even put themselves in a winning position. Why not put ourselves in that same path? Why not put ourselves on that same path to victory? It's going to work against, weaker teams, smaller teams, right, that don't have the same size on the depth, the interior of the defensive line, the linebacker room. That's not. I don't think Oregon has a size mismatch here with Penn State at all. But a team that is more inclined to be a speedy team, fly across the field and make electric plays. What happens when they do slow it down and they say, we're going to go a little methodical here. We're going to run those 6 offensive lineman sets, 7 offensive lineman sets, and factor in some tight ends as well.
Yeah.
That's when you mention Andy Kotelnicki and just how fun of a playbook it is. It's because he can go in so many different directions. 3 tight ends, 7 offensive linemen, 3 running backs. If they wanted to go 4 wide receivers, in theory they could. They're not going to, but it's so many different. They're going to run Wildcat. I would expect to see a Wildcat wrinkle with Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen in the backfield at the same time, and then somebody's getting the football. Which one? You don't know.
Right. And when you brought up the 7 offensive lineman package, the reason my immediate answer was yes. The depth of Oregon's defensive line, I think, is better than any group on either side of the ball, quite frankly. Now, Oregon goes very deep at receiver as well, but the defensive line has been a point of emphasis in recruiting. They've retained almost all the talent that they've brought in. They're all former blue chip guys pretty much, and they all look the part, and they've rotated a lot of them this year. The first 2 guys on the field have typically been Amari Washington and Tioni Gray, but you've got Bear Alexander, one-time Penn State commit, ? Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and Bear Alexander is someone you're going to see. Aiden Breland, someone you're going to see. Terrence Green is one of the largest human beings that will take the field for either team. Like, Oregon legitimately on the interior of the defensive line could go 6 or 7 deep, and I feel good about the production that you can get there. And at the edge positions as well, whether it's defensive end or that outside linebacker jack position, like I think they literally can go probably 5 deep, and I feel good about what you have there. Obviously, your starters are your best players, but I feel like the depth is definitely there. One more thing on Kotelnicki against Lupoi I want to throw out there. Dylan Thieneman, and at times Kingston Lopa, but mostly Thieneman, the Purdue transfer, they've used him in certain packages the way that Ohio State uses Caleb Downs. They've been doing this really interesting and new formation that, Jim Knowles, now Penn State's defense coordinator, did with Caleb Downs last year, where you take your nickel and you make him a deep safety. You have your other deep safety, and then you take this star player. He's not playing the star position necessarily. Dylan Thielen is a free safety. You just basically put him in the middle of the field in between your safeties and your linebackers, and you make him a rover. And you just say, just go. Just be. I don't even know if he has specific assignments. I haven't asked Coach Lupoi about that. But he basically stands in the middle of the field and just reads and reacts and does anything that he wants. We've seen that, not all the time, but we have seen that from the Ducks so far consistently this season. And I wonder what that means for Penn State's willingness to run the ball, because it's kind of a 6.5-man box, essentially. A 7-man box would be 4 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers. And when you go 2 deep safeties, you put a guy in between him and the linebackers, it's a 6.5-man box. I wonder if that is something Kotelnicki feels like he wants to go to the perimeter with, because guys are kind of condensed in the middle of the field, or if he looks at it and goes, yeah, let's just run the ball.
If it's a 5 defensive back formation versus 6 or 7 offensive linemen, he's going to run full force. That's kind of the idea here, is that you force Oregon, because an offensive lineman beats a defensive back every single time in a one-on-one situation, right? Or for the most part, I guess you can juke around them, but that's the idea.
It's pretty hard.
It's the idea is that the powerful, stronger player is going to win that block in a one-on-one. So you mentioned that about the Enneman. Zachy Wheatley and Jim Knowles is doing that with Zachy Wheatley. So excited to talk about that same concept in the next segment too, from my point of view for the defensive side of things. But yeah, I like that strategy a ton. You just say to your best player, just kind of go, be free, be disruptive. And players like the Enneman, Wheatley, Downs, that kind of can just do it all. They can defend against the run. They can defend against the pass. They can be almost a QB spy, just kind of play center field and just kind of sit back and just watch the play develop. That takes a very intelligent football player to do it. So Oregon having that and being able to get that out of the transfer portal and just having them fit into the defense is, well, phenomenal for them.
Yeah, we're going to flip sides and talk about the other coordinator matchup, because that too has got a lot of interesting aspects to it. First, this episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. The NFL season's here, college football as well, and FanDuel's making sure that you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. This game currently sits, as we record this show, at Penn State -3.5. Now, some of the Oregon fans out there might be listening to that here and go, oh my goodness, free money on Oregon plus 3.5. Well, FanDuel.com is right there for you. Penn State fans might be thinking, hey, Penn State's putting it all together this week. The offensive woes are going to be a thing of the past. -3.5. It's Penn State by 20 this week. You might think that's free money. FanDuel.com. If you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. You get up to $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Check them out at FanDuel.com.
And now, as we continue with the inverse matchup, Penn State's defense versus Oregon's offense, this isn't going to be anything like the Big Ten championship from a season ago. If you anticipate that, hey, Oregon's going to be able to put up 45 points easily and then maybe some more, do not compare it, because now Jim Knowles is a part of the equation. So if you're looking for, well, where's that previous matchup? Where can I analyze this? Go to Ohio State-Oregon Part 1 and then Ohio State-Oregon Part 2. And now you're essentially getting that here, because I don't look at it necessarily so much as it's Oregon versus Penn State. Of course it is, but I break it down as Tosh Lupoi against Andy Kotelnicki Part 2. This is Will Stein versus Jim Knowles Part 3. Okay, yeah. So that battle, the tape between Ohio State and Oregon, that is where you're going to find a lot of the answers to what's going to go down here in this matchup between Penn State and Oregon. But you say, hey, Oregon's doing this with defensive backs here and there. Jim Knowles is doing similar things where they're just able to, I just like the way that Jim Knowles is so much more creative. James Franklin talked about it, how they can do so much more with man coverages, zone coverages, blitzes, the way that they invert those coverages, how they've just been such a predominantly man-to-man team over the past 3-4 years. That includes Tom Allen and Manny Diaz alike. But now Jim Knowles just adds so much more than just, hey, let's run man and let's run blitz and then disguise our coverages properly. And that's the whole thing about Knowles' system, is that it's so complex and so hard to figure out on a play-by-play basis.
Yeah, so the biggest difference between the two matchups last year, Oregon, of course, put up 21 points in the Rose Bowl, 32 at Autzen Stadium. And, there were only eight of those points in the first half in the Rose Bowl. Like, it was very different. One of the touchdowns came when the game was basically decided. So it was very different. The biggest statistical contrast, Zach, was in game one. Oregon outgained Ohio State on the ground 155 to 140, or roughly in that range. They were in the positive in the rushing department. Now, the NCAA counts sack yardages into rushing totals, which I think is dumb.
It's the dumbest thing.
It's really dumb. It's really dumb. It's really, really dumb. Learn to distinguish between a design quarterback run and a sack or a scramble or anything like that. It's dumb. So you look at the box score and you see that Oregon ran for minus 23 yards against Ohio State on January 1st. Well, you got to take out the sack yardage there, which would bring their total up to a whopping 20 yards as a team when you take out Dylan Gabriel's sack yardage. And, oh, by the way, he was sacked 8 times in that game. So that was, I think, the biggest difference. Coaches will tell you all the time, any defensive coordinator will tell you that. I literally had a coach tell me last week, you can't have a good secondary if your front four can't get there. And your secondary gets a lot better when your front four can just go out and win. It allows them to scheme differently, allows them to play differently, think different, changes everything when you don't have to cover for as long. So I think that difference for Oregon was rather profound. But schematically, the other thing that changed from game one to game two was in the first one, Ohio State brought everybody up and said, this is not a downfield shot taking offense. This is check it down. The sort of tropes you hear about the Will Stein system. And Oregon said, oh, okay, well, then we're just going to go over the top. And they went over the top with Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson, and they created a bunch of big plays. Then in the second game, those shots just weren't executed, and Ohio State was ready for it, and Will Stein wasn't able to counter in time. So, how this matchup plays out for round 3, I'm really interested to see, can Oregon get those downfield shots? Because the back shoulder fades to Malik Benson and DeCorian Moore have been a great development in this Oregon offense. Are those going to be there? Is that something they feel like they can go out and execute against a Penn State defense that's much better than what they've seen so far? Or do they feel like, no, we'll take those shots if we have to, but we want to attack them in other ways? But, from game 1 to game 2, those were the biggest things that changed. Ohio State won up front, and Oregon didn't hit any deep shots.
I think you're going to want to try to mimic part 1 as much as possible, at least from what I've seen so far. And again, that just it's dictated on the matchup. You don't need to be as conscious with the explosiveness of Villanova, Nevada, FIU, right? You don't have to work. Whoa, this quarterback.
You're telling me the Wildcats and the Panthers are not downfield passing threats against Penn State?
Believe it or not, Villanova was actually the best of the bunch, and that's not to disrespect FIU and Nevada. It's that Villanova has that capability. But so Dante Moore can launch a football 80 yards, right? You have Malik Benson and DeCorian Moore and a bunch of others. Kenyon Sadiq too. His athleticism can go catch a deep pass. Don't think of Sadiq as, oh, well, he's a tight end, so he's your 5 to 10 yard guy. Check it down. No. That's a guy up the seam.
I think Penn State fans of any fan base in the country should understand what this guy is capable of. Like, coming into the year, his kind of brief coming out party was in that Big Ten championship game when he hurdled a guy on the first drive and then caught another touchdown.
So I've seen a lot of cover 3. I've seen a lot of man-to-man coverage for what Penn State is doing so far. And again, is that matchup dependent, or is that how Penn State's just going to run out of a base? Is that we believe our corners are better on, one-on-one coverage with no safety help than your passing targets, which means Sadiq's going to be in one-on-one, Benson's going to be on one-on-one, Moore's going to be one-on-one, because the focus is let's win the matchup up front, neutralize the ground game, and see if we can get organic pressure on Dante Moore. And if that's the case, okay, is A.J. Harris better than Nicorian Moore? Is Elliott Washington / Damian Collins? And again, that matchup's going to change, but Moore and Benson versus A.J. Harris and Elliott Washington primarily, which duo is better? And then Zachy Wheatley versus Kenyon Sadiq. Can you win mano-a-mano, or do you have to scheme some wrinkles up to say this is too easy if Will Stein's able to just kind of win because his star players are better than Penn State's star players on that given day?
Yeah, I'll close today's show with this, and we'll do another crossover on Friday, get to our matchups and predictions as well. But, Will Stein, when he first got hired, the quote that flew around most consistently when you heard him talking about offense was feed the studs. You have great players, get them the ball, create one-on-one situations, and that's kind of the whole point. He doesn't just do a good job of emphasizing that philosophy of, hey, get our best players the ball with an opportunity to be explosive and dynamic. It's not as simple as, let's just set up a one-on-one shot and throw up a 50-50 ball. We've seen that more this year, and Oregon's been very successful. But his ability to design plays that get his guys open and put them in advantageous situations. You think of, Oregon's used some under center this year, and the play action shots that they've had from those spots have been really, really dangerous for the last couple of years. You look at the Washington game, they created an explosive to Terrence Ferguson last year, Kenyon Sadiq just this past week against Oregon State. Those are the sorts of things that I think Penn State has to be able to take away, because you can't allow anything easy for this Oregon offense, because unless Dante Moore overthrows a deep ball, which he did twice last week, the playmakers are too good and they're all over the place. And I think that Stein has had some really good designs to get his playmakers in opportunities where a defender's on his heels or just not in a spot where he's going to be in a great position to cover him. But I think this chess match is, again, really fun. It's hard from the Oregon perspective to not feel better about Jim Knowles in this matchup. It really is tough because, game one, advantage Will Stein, but game two was a bigger advantage to Jim Knowles than game one was an advantage to Stein. And that was at Autzen, and this is, of course, on the road. So based on what we heard last week from Oregon coaches, Dan Lanning in particular, they've been looking ahead to this one for a while. Dan Lanning said in his postgame, the switch has already been flipped when talking about, when do you forget about this one, go to Penn State. And he was just like, yeah, we're already there. We're already there. So the build-up to the game is just so incredibly real, and I think that all these different little schematic moments that'll come down to a couple of individual plays, it's going to be really, really fun one way or another on Saturday night. Seyko, you got any final thoughts for today?
I think that the final thing that I wanted to point out is just the dramatic change in points from the 32-31 score the first time to what it was in the Rose Bowl, right? How egregious it was, how lopsided it was, and that Oregon didn't even really figure it out in the second half either. It was just Ohio State from the word go. That's gonna regress back to the middle. I'm not trying to say that Penn State, because they have Jim Knowles, they're gonna do that. But just think about that for a moment, is that Jim Knowles was able to figure it out and then some. It wasn't, hey, we picked one or two different spots where we thought we could gain an advantage. It was total flat out domination. That's kind of where I want to watch. How does Will Stein respond from that?
Yeah, I'm with you. And it was domination overall with the game plan and situationally. Oregon really struggled in a number of spots in that particular game. So there's your coach talk for the day. But much more exciting than the traditional coach speak you get. Zach Seyko, Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm Spencer McLaughlin, Locked On Ducks. We will do this again for Friday's show, where we will have our predictions. Will I change my mind and pick Oregon to win the game? You'll just have to tune in to find out. Appreciate everyone listening. We'll see you next time, and until then, hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.